When it comes to Alabama football and getting ready for the season, I think one of the main questions that Jimmy and I always get is about the defensive line. So let's talk about the defensive line today.
Locked On Bama, your daily podcast on the Alabama Crimson Tide. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back into Locked On Bama. Luke Robinson, that's me. Jimmy Stein, that's him. Jimmy, how are you today?
Oh, I'm really good. Busy. There's just so much football stuff going on. I'm writing down stuff even as we're starting.
Thank you guys for making us your first listen. We truly appreciate you. Jimmy, let's just get into it. We want to talk about defensive line. You know, we're going to talk about Keon Keeley in the third segment. We're going to talk about an interesting new deal with Jalen Milroe in the second segment and talk about this little thing with Najee Harris and Nick Saban too. But defensive line, I would say more people ask me about the defensive line situation than they do just about any other position. I mean, you know, everybody loves the backup quarterback, right? But at Alabama, it feels like, even though we've had pretty good defensive linemen, it feels like right now there's a lot of consternation about the defensive linemen that we are recruiting or that are committing other places. And people are just sort of baffled that the defensive line maybe isn't quite as dominant over these last couple of years as it has been, you know, early on in the Saban tenure. But I'm just going to run down the defensive line on the roster right now. And I'm going to run them all down and then just let you speak about whatever you'd like to say. Anquan Barnes, Jamil Burrows, DJ Dale, Justin Aboigbe, Monkel Goodwine, Isaiah Hastings, Tim Keenan, Jamarian Latham, Jaheim Otis, Damon Payne, Curtis Perry, Chase Quigley, who I don't know much about it. Chase Quigley. Okay, he sounds like he's in that. He's a walk-on. He's good. He's in the new Crocodile Dundee movie, I think. Tim Smith, Tristan Walker, and Byron Young. Those are our defensive linemen. Now, when I read those aloud, maybe I'm a little more impressed. I'm only impressed because I follow recruiting really well. And I remember really wanting like somebody like Anquan Barnes. I remember really wanting Tim Keenan, even though he wasn't quite as highly regarded. I wanted him badly. I thought really thought he'd make a move. This defensive lineup that I just read off would be awesome for 96, 97% of college football. For Alabama, it does feel less than stellar. Again, that's not awful. It's all by Alabama standards. But, man, I really want to see somebody really bust on the scene here. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, you know, we're not blind to the situation. We're not blind. We're not cheerleading. I know for myself, that's not my intent. I'm not blind to the fact that Alabama's put better defensive lines on the field than they will put on the field this season. It's been better. There's been more star power. There's been Quinnen Williams's. There's been Jonathan Allen's. There's been Marcel Darius's. Several other just, you know, prominent, Ashawn Robinson, Jaron Reed, heck, even Phil Mathis. There's been better starting defensive lines. That is true. There's also been, I think, the loss of Peter Woods in recruiting, the loss of Kelby Collins, which happened this weekend at this position, in-state guys that most Alabama fans penciled in to the recruiting class. I think when you combine those two things, there is a ton of consternation about the Alabama defensive line. It's certainly on our board at Bama Insider, which everyone should check out because it's great discussion over there all the time. But there's also consternation about the defensive line. If you're concerned about the defensive line, maybe you should come check out those talks. I'm talking about it every day over there, whether I want to or not. Now, I'm not blind to it. It is a thing. It is even fair to paint it negatively that Alabama's been better on the defensive line than they are right now. Alabama's recruiting on the defensive line has been better than it is right now. Both of those things are true. But people that go too far with it, I think, are more wrong than the people that cheerlead about it. Because here's the fact. The entire Alabama defensive line, the starters, the entirety of them, if you want to call the starters DJ Dale, Byron Young, and Justin Boygby, are headed to the Senior Bowl, are very likely to go to the Senior Bowl. The Senior Bowl, by the way, is not a reward for Alabama players who are starters. The Senior Bowl tries to only invite players that are going to be taken in the NFL draft. For Alabama fans to think the defensive line sucks when the entirety of the line is slated to be drafted is, I'm trying not to say dumb, but it's pretty dumb. I mean, everybody in the country would like to have that problem. The defensive line, they're all draftable, but they're not first-round picks. I say this all the time, and I'm talking about getting into the depth because there's depth beyond those guys. There's Tim Smith. There's Jamil Burrows. There's a legion of good recruits. We all know what Jaheim Otis is doing this fall camp. There are probably, Luke, only 4 or 5 defensive line rooms in all of college football better than Alabama's. I ask that question all the time, and no one ever really wants to take it on. They just want to moan about how terrible it is, and then when I say, name 5 that are clearly better, no one does or can. But I guess Nick Saban has spoiled us to the point that if it's not number 1, it sucks. So that's sort of crazy to me, while acknowledging that it's not as good as it once was. That's about the starters. That's also about the recruiting. Again, I think by the time recruiting is over in this cycle, Alabama's defensive line group will be among the top 5 in all of recruiting, in all of college football recruiting. Only 3 or 4 schools, if that, will sign a better defensive line group than Alabama, even if it doesn't include Peter Woods and Kelby Collins. So I'm fine discussing it as how come we've fallen from a perch a bit, but the idea that there is some sort of problem or some sort of, hey, this is ending the dynasty. I mean, that's insane. I mean, the standard can't be number 1 in everything, all of it, or fire people. It's just sort of crazy to me. But, is there a fall off to what once was? Maybe at that spot. But if you're going to say, okay, there's a fall off there, how about the fact there's an uptick in other spots? We've never had an outside linebacker duo like we have with Will and Dallas. That's a first. It's never been that good. Jahmyr Gibbs, the best pass receiving running back we've ever had in the era. Bryce Young won the Heisman and came back. Will Reichard's the best place kicker we've had since senior year Lee Tiffin. I mean, there's a lot of things that are better than normal. So no one ever wants to talk about that.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, it's like Fox News and CNN. I mean, nobody reports the good news. Nobody wants to watch that. So, I mean, and that's the truth. Nobody wants to say, what happened today? Here's this this family of baby raccoons was rescued by a rabid polar bear for no reason. This is awesome. And nobody ever wants to see that story. They want to see the story. The economy's so bad. I don't know why. We all got monkeypox. If you don't have monkeypox, you're going to have monkeypox. And if you don't have monkeypox, you're going to get polo with a little bit of COVID sprinkled in there, like the Salt Bay guy.
That's true. That is true. And I don't know what that says about humanity, but that is.
It says we're terrible.
CNN and here, hey, one of these things that Trump did when he was in charge was really worked out. You don't hear that, nor do you, turn to Fox and say, hey, maybe it was by accident, but Joe Biden had a good idea today. You don't ever hear that. What you hear is doom and gloom about the other side. And I think that lends itself to sports. And, for as much as we're sick about talking about Deshaun Watson, I'm in the sports media industry right now. As much as I'm sick about, I want to hear about, I'm tired of it. But you know what's going to get clicks? any story involving Deshaun Watson.
That's right.
That says a lot about humanity. I don't know how to fix that, though.
Well, Jimmy, you work on that while I go into this live read. You work on the fixing humanity thing.
I'll be right back.
I'm going to work on this live read thing. Look, this is from the NHTSA, Drive Sober or Get Pulled Over. This is a new sponsor. We appreciate them so much. And this is a very important message. Just imagine you're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks. A few becomes a few too many. We've all been there. As the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride. But you live nearby. It's not that big of a deal. You can make it home okay, right? What are the odds you'll get pulled over? I mean, what are the odds? What do you think? And even so, what's the worst that can happen? Your insurance goes up. You lose your license. You lose your job. You total your car. You may kill somebody. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads. They're there to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, you need to think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or change someone else's life forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. That last live read brought to you by our defensive coordinator. No, I'm just teasing. I'm sorry. The joke wrote itself. I mean, people were thinking it.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've all forgiven him. I mean, he paid a penance. I mean, so look, again, there's no reason ever to drive impaired. And really, if Pete Golding can get a DUI, so can you. So, I mean, seriously, don't do it. I mean, luckily nobody was hurt. Okay. I want to talk about this Najee Harris, Nick Saban thing for a second.
Yeah, this was news to me. Glad that you brought this up. I've been super busy with football, and somehow that story sailed right past me.
Do you even know the story?
I do not, but lay it on.
This is going to be interesting.
Great.
Okay.
Listener now, because hey, you're telling me the news.
Well, apparently, Najee Harris was on a podcast called The Pivot, and it's got some former NFL players that host it. And this, there are a lot of podcasts now. A lot of former players are getting in on this. I mean, Draymond Green's podcast, all that stuff. None of them can hang with Locked On, but still. Sure. So on The Pivot, they were talking to Najee Harris, and they were talking to him about his relationship with Nick Saban. And he told this story about how when he first got to Alabama, he and Saban really butted heads. And in fact, he said, nobody really knows this, but I left school for 2 weeks. He said, I was leaving. I was leaving Alabama. And the reason was he didn't go into any specifics. Like there was this one time Saban said this and I said that. He basically said, look, I don't think Nick Saban was used to a California kid in so many words. And he said, Nick Saban, which is odd because we've had a few California kids, but Najee said he came here.
The one playing quarterback right now seems to get along with Nick just fine.
Yeah. And so did the one, so did Tua Tagovailoa, who was kind of from California, sort of.
From Folsom, California, Jonah Williams.
Yeah. So anyway, he said, yeah, I came here and Nick was sort of yelling at him a little bit, and apparently Najee yelled a little bit back. And he said, look, it wasn't like he was kicking me off the team or that I was actually leaving, but he said I took some time. And then he said I came back. He and I got his office and we had some more words, and Najee said I decided to stay, but he said after that meeting, he said it felt like Saban and I had a better understanding. Now, the way I'm saying it makes it sound like Najee kind of won out, but the way Najee was saying it, it almost was like this was a mutual thing. Like Najee's a different dude. He's sort of a bizarre cat. Now, bizarre in a good way, not like he's got like a
He's interesting.
Yeah, it's not like he's got a fetish for ostrich feet or something. I mean, he's I don't even know what that is. If you have an ostrich foot fetish, is that something? Mm-hmm. But he's bizarre in the sense that he goes to his own beat, and he's a sort of an unassuming superstar. And I think that he had to be humbled a little bit. And it sounds like he did become a little more humbled. And what's interesting to me, the guy that posted on one of the message boards, an Alabama fan, was like, this is why Najee's one of my least favorite superstars that Nick Saban's had. And I'm like, I don't know that I look at it that way. I think Najee's a great dude. And I don't want every player coming in thinking they can be like that. Najee's different. Najee is one of the highest recruits we've ever signed in Nick Saban or any time. And his highest rated recruit. So he has a little leverage. Bryce Young has a little leverage. I don't want a guy who might be participating on the defensive line as a junior coming in and feeling like, no, Nick Saban, you can't talk to me that way, because he will be sent packing. So, it's not fair that that's the way it is, but that is the way it is. It's kudos to both of them for getting past it. Kudos to Nick Saban for not having such a hardline stance that he boots him off the team, because Lord knows we needed Najee Harris in 2020. We need him in the national championship game as a true freshman against Georgia. So I just thought it was an interesting story, right here before the season starts,
Right. Well,
you don't.
No, I do. I think it's incredibly interesting, but to me, it boils down to, why a coach's job is so hard, managing 85 different personalities. Najee's going to be a different personality than what you normally have in the locker room, and Coach Saban and the running back coach. And I think Najee had a couple when he was at Alabama, recruited by Burton Burns, but he wasn't coached by Burton Burns all the way through. I think that was a factor. I think when you're recruited by one running back coach and you like him and you're like, hey, this is why I want to go there, and then that guy ends up leaving, that's tough for kids to stick around, because you're like, hey, man, I want to play for this guy. That's why I came here. But for the head coach to manage those 85 personalities is incredibly difficult. Coach Saban and Coach Bryant are two of the best that's ever done it. And ultimately, Coach Saban obviously handled Najee well, because Najee was at Alabama for 4 years, not 2, not 3, 4 full years. People need to remember that. He wasn't a 3 and done guy. He stayed all 4 years at Alabama, and credit Nick Saban for that, and Najee for having some level of patience. But let's remember this, and this is the biggest thing about recruiting when you're at an Alabama. This is different than other places. It's not solely Alabama, but Alabama's one of those places where a Najee Harris, who there's no telling what he accomplished athletically in the small community where he's from in California. I know you think of Najee being from San Francisco in this really big town. Everyone's from a smaller community, even if they're from a big town. But Najee was probably the best basketball player, the best baseball player, by far the best football player, the best track guy. He's just the best. And since he was 12 years old, he's had adults kissing his butt and giving him anything he wants to kind of be part of the Najee experience. And he's in any kid in that situation have a giant ego, and you're the best that's ever been in your town, and then you're the best that's ever been in your middle school, and you're the best that's ever been at your high school, and then you get recruited by Alabama and Michigan and everybody else, and then you get to Alabama, and what do you know? The butt kissing is replaced by, you're not as good as Josh Jacobs. When are you going to block for your teammates? And he's like, block? I'm going to have to Google that. What the hell does that mean? I don't know what that means. But yet you got to pick up blitzes. You got to catch the ball. You're not as good as Josh. You're not as good as Damian Harris. And let me tell you, it's not easy to handle that when you've been told since you were 10 that you're probably the greatest athlete that's ever been made. So that's why it's so difficult for these kids. And kudos to Najee for exercising some level of patience. I mean, the first thing I would ask Najee at the end of that interview is this: were you a better football player in 2020? That's a senior year. Were you a better football player in 2020 than you were in 2017? That's the question for him. And if he's being honest, and I know he will be, because Najee will go, oh, heck yeah. And isn't that what Coach Saban's job is? Isn't that what the running backs coach job is? Is that Najee came to Alabama really blessed and left Alabama a better player than he was when he showed up. And everybody's a winner in that situation, even if it was a bumpy ride to get there.
All right, Jimmy, we're going to take a break and come back. I want to talk about the prospects of Keon Okay, so Keon Keeley committed to Notre Dame, one of the top probably 3 or to 5 years at university. We've talked about him a lot. Still committed. Sort of like between Perkins, who's been on flip watch so long now. I have to reset my I'm going past daylight time. I don't have to. Keon Keeley supposedly will be decommitting. Notre Dame boards believe that. More it just hasn't happened yet. But I think if it happens, I wouldn't expect him to immediately flip to Alabama. I think he may take a little time.
Yeah, different situation altogether than Perkins. Different situation, and I don't know. No one really knows what's going on. Perkins, he doesn't do interviews. I mean, you can't get Perkins on the phone to do interviews, which is fine. That's up to him. With Keeley, who's a little more accessible, the expectation, even talking to Notre Dame people, the expectation is that Keeley's going to decommit from Notre Dame, and when he does, Notre Dame's going to be done with him. That's the expectation. Now, is it going to happen? I believe so. I really believe so. The great recruiting reporters at Bama Insider believe so. So I believe them. Andrew Bone and Joe Spacings do a great job, and they're into this situation pretty well. And that's what the expectation is. That it will happen this week. But I think this could happen in stages. I don't think Keon Keeley is going to decommit from Notre Dame and commit to Alabama. My expectation per Bone, per Hastings, is that Keon Keeley will decommit from Notre Dame, and it's fair at that point to say Alabama's the leader, but he is going to look around, and he is seriously considering Ohio State. I think he will end up seriously considering others. I don't think in his mind he's shut out Notre Dame, but it would feel a little bit more like a divorce than a breakup should he decommit. But what a freak player, what a great kid. Whoever ends up with Keon Keeley is going to have one heck of a Christmas.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it, and I just hope it's us. I mean, that's going to do it for the day's podcast. We will be back tomorrow with another Locked On Bama. Until then, everybody, roll tide.
Roll Tide.